Hello everybody. I don't know who is here. And now I need to remember, what was the software I used that allowed me to see chat? I haven't a bloody clue. Somewhere in here. No. Haven't a clue. Anyway, let's see if anyone joins. Got a bit of sound tracks in the background. Weird. Anyway. Right. So, everything seems to silence and not work. I've had the microphone silence, the what's it? Oh, I have a desktop back. Oh, whatever. Yeah, it's 3 things now. The microphone decided not to work, then the earphones decided not to work, and now the game decided not to work with its sound. Eventually, we will get it working. Hopefully. Bloody hopefully. Oh, we have a viewer. I haven't a clue who it is. But hello anyone. Hello anyway. Oh. That's promising. Well, hey! Oh, I think I remember what it's called now. Let's have all this load up. While it's doing that, I think it was called Restream? Yes, it is. Here we go. Hopefully that means... update. Then I can see what you guys are saying without me switching back and forth. And, So yes, I'll have the chat around. While I'm on here, you guys can have some visuals rather than me just swooping around on a desktop this time. Because I was going into manuscripts and nobody seemed to like it. I don't give a damn. Okay. Again. Oh, hang on. Is it that? Yes! I know myself too well. So there's me. Good, right. And there should be an option. Actually, if I'm in this. Okay. Up, left. No, it keeps it centered. That's cool. I can read the text and respond to anything you guys say live immediately as I see them. you guys have any questions about upcoming videos or anything like that, be my guest. At the moment I'm only seeing me saying hello to you. And in the meantime, while I'm waiting for people to say something, I will go on Minecraft. I mean, heck, there are people who just stream Minecraft all day long, so I'm sure somebody's going to love this. That wasn't cool. Doing, I'm buggering about, trying to make a sort of mountainous area. I sort of started by just climbing to the top of this part, which I thought was the tallest mountain, and it's not. It's the second tallest. Oh, is that my dude? Oh, well, Jonah, glad you asked. I've actually got... I mean, unfortunately, the training is cancelled for tonight due to some stuff going on at the church. Nobody's fault, really. That's just how things are sometimes. Events are planned, things happen. But the good news is, in the meantime, the order from Genie has arrived, or at least seems to have arrived. That's what they're suggesting. And that would mean that I've got a review which I'll be doing, which I'm going to upload very soon, which is for my Genie Fetish Vet that I got at Fight Camp. However, I will have a saber and a proper sort of fighting style longsword, rather than just a fetish vet. Let's just check this is all going okay. Yes, it is. So yeah, it means I'm having a new fetish vet and a new saber. I'll have reviews of 2 swords, and I will have, I'll have sparring footage with steel sabers and with steel longsword and such things a lot more often. And additionally, I got some Spez heavy gloves, which means I can actually spar with steel. If you ever watched my sparring footage, you'll notice there was a significant amount just with the nylon ones, you know, the plastic and those sorts of things. That and the foam ones, of course. That is because I never really had the gauntlets for steel sparring until now. It's taken me, what, 8 years of HEMA before I've actually got that. Quite late, but now I've got them, it's all okay. So yeah, I'll have more sparring. I've got a review coming up, which I've already recorded and just need to edit and upload, which I'll probably do this evening, which will be for the Genie Feder. And then after that, I can review and also actually spar with the saber and the longsword. So there'll be plenty of upgrading to steel going on, which I'm glad to be finally doing. What I really need to do is sort out paying for the items and then just use them. It's as simple as that. With my schedule and the sort of clubs and things I go to, that would mean my next sparring opportunity will be in about 2 weeks from now, but it'll be on a Monday. So much about it. When principles being out off the specific nation. HEMA is actually a modern thing in terms of as a concept. Basically, people wanted martial arts, just like, you know, your Aikido, Judo, Kendo, all of those sorts of things. But there wasn't really anything out there, because a lot of it's... I mean, it's funny, there's a lot of stuff that is useful, but it's been quite sportified. So, for example, there was stuff like, say, small sword fencing, which was historical and was potentially deadly, used in duels to the first blood or death, all those things. And just... it got turned into modern sport fencing. Excuse me, or you get things like your pugilism, medieval wrestling, and those things which have turned into your catch wrestling, MMA, boxing, and those sorts of things today. But it's all been so sportified that people feel like it's no longer martially viable. And I can see where they're coming from. The biggest problems are you have techniques and things which can be quite viable, but people don't train in them properly, because when you've got a sport and you've got certain rules, the professionals, the ones who really specialise in that sport, will game the rules. It's just inevitable. So hence, in trying to get points, they won't train things which aren't allowed. They will train things to the extreme that are within the rules, and it just gets so sportified. So anyway, I'm digressing. Point is, with all of that, means that it was also sportified. There wasn't really anything there for people who wanted those sorts of martial arts. So thus, HEMA was born. People had previously found manuscripts like the Tower manuscript, that's the one they call the I or 133, Fiore's manuscripts, and all of that. So it's not something that originates in history. What we are calling historical European martial arts as an actual concept is something that was only done in the past 20 years or something. There weren't any traditions. We had to go straight back to the sources. You know, books which were written for some duke or other famous person, or, you know, in someone's private collection for many years, or common British military sabre training manuals and things for the army, and just collate it all together under one unified martial art. So, in a way, HEMA is many things, and it's one thing, because it's got all of the different manuscripts and the origination and all of that, which makes it sort of loads of different martial arts all in one package. And indeed, when you've got different clubs focusing on different things, that starts to get exaggerated further. But on the other hand, it is all one. There is a specific community of HEMA, which makes it quite distinctly like other martial arts, and hopefully will be accepted as a proper martial art, or a set of martial arts eventually. In terms of the principles that people are after, there are a few top things they're after, but it all boils down to just what's martially viable from the European sources. So, you know, they'll look at how people fought in duels, battles, or in just historical sports like, you know, jousting and I think they're called the barriers, where people armoured up and just hit each other for fun, or, you know, competitively, and just collating all of that information together into something tangible. Because it's quite difficult for someone to approach the manuals and manuscripts and think, okay, how do I learn from this? Especially when you're translating from old languages. I mean, I can barely make head or tail of George Silver's treatises, and he's from the Renaissance and spoke English. You know, it's something like William Shakespeare would speak. I can barely make head or tail of it. So imagine how much worse it is when you're looking at some sort of middle middle medieval Italian or something. It's just impossible. And even when you've got it translated roughly into English, it can be tough to get a proper understanding. Nomenclature of European martial arts was a much variation of fighting styles across Europe. It's difficult to tell because one of the main problems is there was quite there aren't a huge number of sources. It's like, for example, I can talk about we say about things like, for example, medieval medieval German versus Italian fencing. However, when people like me are talking about Italian medieval fencing, we're actually talking about people who are pretty much, either part of or offshoots of the same person. That being Fiore della Berry. So we can say, yes, this is the Italian style of fencing. But what is that really? I mean, we could say it's the Italian style, but truth be told, it could very well have been some guy's particular style, or maybe one of a few styles, or perhaps there was some sort of homogeneous European style, and you just had 3 or 4, and a few individuals preferred one style over another. So I could go around saying, this is the Italian way, based on Fiore's treatises and Vadi's treatises, bearing in mind Vadi was, Filippo Vadi that is, was a student of Fiore, so of course he's not just some person from Italy who happened to have the same styles. It's not a coincidence. One's the master and one's the student, So then it becomes a question of, okay, is that the Italian style, or is it an Italian style? I mean, I'd considered, you could have, it could very well have been the opposite way round with what we're thinking. Because these treatises were taught to rich people, they were written for people who are quite high up, which suggests it was something they hadn't seen before. So ironically, we could be going around today saying, so this is the German longsword and this is the Italian longsword, when it's the opposite way around, The stuff that was taught in Italy was the stuff from Germany that the Italians hadn't seen before, so they want to know more. And then the German stuff being this weird Italian stuff that the Germans wanted to know. And we've been going all this time. Yeah, again, it's that sort of thing. In terms of nationwide styles, it gets more. I know that there seems to be more of diversity. There's no regiment. There's no specific training code that we know of. So hence it was a load of individual styles around the medieval period and earlier, from what we can tell. Although, I mean, again, even with stuff like the Roman training, there was a lot of homogenization in that. Did they do that with the actual sword fighting skills as well? Don't know. Maybe it was varied and just imported from, the Celtic styles and the Iberian styles and all of that. One thing is clear, though. There is a definite unified training system around the Napoleonic eras and later. Because you look at things like the Napoleonic sabre, and those are very distinctly designed to be trained to, to regiments of the military. And if you look at things like, let me think, you've got Roworth, Angelo, I think Hutton, did he do some manuscripts? I can't remember. But those sorts of people, they had training systems which were taught across the British military. And that's just one example. There were, I think, Swedish and Polish military systems as well. So hence you end up with something that's much more defined. So when I say, you know, I'm learning British military sabre, I can confidently say, yes, that is the way that a British man with a sabre would fight. Unless he specifically, you know, had gone to somewhere exotic and learnt other styles as well as an individual. But the actual styles designed for him would have been what we're seeing in the British military sabre, compared to the medieval systems where we think, maybe a lot of people did this, maybe it was rare, don't know. Because there are two ways you could look at it. Either the stuff that we're learning in things like Fiore's manuals, the Lichtenauer manuals, Talhoffer's manuscripts, maybe it was the simple, you know, it was the simple stuff, comparatively, of an exotic style. So look, were things like arming swords and other basic, that's fine, equipment fairly standardised. There are, I mean, you know, there are only so many ways you can have that sort of item, so there is a degree of uniformity. You know, straight bladed, double edged, got a good point on it, that sort of thing. But there certainly weren't strict specifications in manufacture. Oh no. We've got loads of examples, you know, of different arming swords. You have some, I remember hearing of some that were pretty much just almost like a spike, in the same way as a rondelle in dagger terms, just a big spike. Excuse me. Whereas you get ones like my favourite, the the Oakshot Type 14 modern typology, is very distinctly, you know, well, it's a cutting sword, very much so. Which is why I like the Type 14 so much, because I do thrust with swords, but not that often. Hence, I prefer broad cutting swords that are good when you're using styles like sword and buckler. I can say there was a degree of standardisation organically, because there is only so strong a human can get. There are only, you know, there are certain specifications which just are good for swords. Like I said, the double-edged, well, actually say that, single-edged swords are common. You know, having swords made of certain materials, like your certain steels, with higher carbon steel being a lot more common. I mean, you could make a... Oh, hello, Messy Laura. So as I was saying that, you know, you could have certain swords with strange properties, like, for example, you know, you could have a sword made of mild steel, something that's quite soft. But realistically, it's just not going to work, you know. You can try to make a sword different and special, but really it's going to make it a distinctly inferior sword. But you see a lot of diversity where, you know, where it's more debatable. For example, should the sword have a triangular, gradually tapering blade that thrusts, or a broad, narrow, you know, thinner sort of blade that cuts? There's a huge amount of variation. You get sort of like an estoc type of triangular section, very much going to thrust, can cut but not very well sort of styles, all the way through to swords that actually are pretty much like sort of giant cleavers. You don't even see a point on them, although they're rarer. But overall, it seems to be fairly commonly agreed to have swords that have a, you know, a good sort of thrusting point, fairly straight bladed. There are swords that curve a bit. Alright, well, thank you, Jonah. I shall see you later. yeah, they were mostly straight swords, but you get some with slight curves. Not much though compared to, I'd say, Eastern. I'm trying to think which swords were curved around that time. I think some Eastern European ones, and yeah. Oh, that's very true. The person wielding the sword will have an effect on what the sword's going to end up being. So you get certain variations. But like I said earlier, there's only so strong a man can get. So hence, you would rarely see a sword ever go above 3 pounds in weight, because after that it's just too heavy. And rarely would you see them go under a pound, because at that point you'd be entering what will later become the small sword, which is great for dueling, but otherwise pretty useless in my opinion. So, you get, within those ranges, there are plenty of choices for swords. Ooh. I've been going the wrong way. Need to go this way. And yes, I did just cheat, kind of. In terms of some of my favourite swords, I mean, like I said, I do very much love the Type 14 arming sword. Broad cutting blade, still got a point on it. Great for chopping and slicing. Plus, I find it very good for I do find it very good for sword and buckler, which is one of my favourite styles. Haven't had a chance to practice it properly, but just the concept of small shield with a sword. Plus, as someone who's done archery in the past, English longbow specifically, I've always loved the idea of learning the companion style of having a buckler you could fit on your belt, plus a sword, since unlike in a video game you can't just lug a large shield while you're using a bow. But you could have something like an arming sword with a buckler, since you could fit those on your belt, have your quiver of arrows, or have your arrows stuck in the ground, whatever, and do all that. And it's also very much good for a civilian defense type of thing, because it's not going to be heavy lugging to have, an arming sword. Whereas something like a two-handed montante or even a longsword or something, it's just, you're rarely going to end up in a self-defense scenario, if ever. So carrying a giant sword around just in case seems over the top. It's been in a medieval siege society. She was an archer of longbow. Ah, nice. Never heard of a medieval siege society. I don't know if that's similar to sort of. I'm gonna have to do what they do when people don't know what HEMA is. Is it like LARP? Is it like reenactment? you know. But I do like sieges. It's interesting because although I've only played video games around that sort of concept, I have had plenty of time to think that actually one of the things that makes me realise why crossbows are so loved is because you can sort of stay behind cover, behind a wall or behind a pavice for ages, and charge up the shot by maybe using a windlass or something, get a really powerful shot to the point where your crossbow is like a miniature ballista, and then unleash hell within about half a second. Have a peek over the over the wall, line up the shot, and then bam, done and dusted. Ooh, excuse me. Whereas with a bow you have to actually knock the arrow, draw the bow, then loose. I do overall prefer bows over crossbows, but if I was in a siege, I would definitely want to have crossbows handy. Ha! You had a trebuchet, mate. Well, I never. I've seen those things launch cars. Granted, not particularly far, because the things seem to handle awkwardly compared to, you know, a ball-shaped projectile. But still impressive to watch nonetheless. So what sorts of projectiles do they use then? Because presumably you're not going to sling, you know, half-ton rocks at people and accidentally cause their misfortunate demise. Did they ever have a slot that you could run a sword through? Oh, yes, Ben. God, this is my work colleague who I hit a lot with swords, and he hits me sometimes. Well, Ben, I am playing a kid's game because I was on my last live streams. I was going into manuscripts, and people were clearly finding it too boring and leaving. So I thought I'd have something more audience friendly. I was talking about swords and shit, you know. So anyway, a slot that you could run your sword through. To be honest, a slot for a sword would be very impractical. The key problem is, although yes, you could, you know, have the sword going through and then, you know, slot through it to the opponent. The biggest problem is it gets tied up in there, because once you've put your sword in the slot, it takes, let's say, half a second or something to pull the sword back out of there. So if I saw somebody with a, you know, a slot in their shield, I'd just wait for them to make a single strike through there. They'd make, you know, one thrust that probably wouldn't be too difficult to parry or, you know, otherwise ward off or void. And then you've got a person with a sword stuck inside their own shield. So then all I need to do is get around it, basically get around the shield, and then rather than having to, you know, when you're doing a normal fight, let's say of a longsword or an arming sword on its own, you have to close a distance. You have to basically grab the handle of the sword or the opponent's own hands to manipulate, and it's really risky. You know, it's a really advanced sort of thing. You need a lot of courage. You need to have the timing right so you don't get cut to pieces. But if there was a sword stuck in a shield, all of those problems go away. You can control the shield from outside it, push it aside, and you have an opponent who can no longer defend themselves. At worst, they might have an extra companion weapon, such as a second sword if you're really unlucky, or a dagger. So just watch out for that, which they have to separately take time to draw, and then, you know, just sort of kill them. What would be better is basically what would be best is having a handled shield for that sort of thing. So you get shields with straps on, or you can get a shield with have a knockout block from inside, wedge close from opponent's side. Yeah, I know what you mean. The flap would close up so it wouldn't make a gap, so you could get yourself hurt through. But my problem isn't really so much, you know, you getting hurt through that gap in a shield. My problem would be the fact that when you put your sword through that slot in a shield, it then gets, you know, it basically locks your sword up. Because if you imagine you've made your strike and the opponent's stopped it, for whatever reason, you know, they've dodged out of the way, they've parried with their sword, they've blocked it on a shield, whatever. Now what do? They've got a sword and or a shield free, or perhaps, you know, they've got a spear longsword, whatever weapon combination they've got it free to use. You've got a sword stuck inside your own shield, and you can't. It would be very awkward to try a quick cut from there. You'd basically only have the choice to thrust, and extending it out would be very strenuous because you've got the weight of the shield on top of the weight of the sword. If you want to do a close range strike, like I say, whether it's close range or further range, your best bet would be to have. I think let's get my bearings straight for a minute. Right, so about that. Okay. So I'm probably around that way. Anyway, I've got my bearings. Your best bet would be a shield that's got a handle rather than straps, like I said earlier. To clarify, you could either keep the shield tight to your body, so if you wanted that Roman-style close-range thrust, then you can keep your sword pretty much braced against your body, and the shield most especially braced against your body. And then whilst you've got yourself covered from one angle, such as your left, in front, above, that sort of thing, you then have your sword sort of placed along the side of the shield, and then just thrust forwards or thrust around your opponent, you know, from your right or from above, from below, that sort of thing. If you want to do thrusts or cuts at a longer range, you can simply extend your hands forward. And I did a video about sword and shield fighting, and I mentioned in the basics that you can extend. I called it tight action, where you keep the sword and you basically keep the shield hand almost attached to the sword hand. So when you've got your shield around it, ranging from a buckler all the way to a large shield, it's covering your hand, but it's also covering a side of your body with a sort of cone of defense extending out, whilst you're able to cut and thrust freely. You know, it's one of the beauties of sword and shield fighting, because instead of with something like saber, when I'm doing saber, I do a lot of what are called two-time defenses, which means parry, riposte, attack, parry, riposte, you know, attack, attack, all of those patterns. If I'm going to do a defense, I have to stop the attack, then do something back at the opponent in two separate things. With sword and shield, I've got two items. Also applies to dual wielding, funnily enough. You know, you can stop the bad thing from happening to you with one item, your offhand sword or your shield, and then with your free weapon, you kill them. Great stuff. You know, usual. Yeah. Ooh, that's a structure. I want to check it out. I'm a bit lost. But hopefully by landmarking this area, which I do, I should find my bearings better. Oh, cool, you saw both videos. So yeah, see what I mean then. It's not really a situation where you've pinned your shield against the opponent. Yeah. Problem is, if you've pinned your shield against the opponent, oftentimes you will have your shield pinned against theirs. Speaking of sword and shield. You are dead. I am from Devon, which is southwest of England. If you know where Cornwall is, you know, your Land's End area. God, this is potent poison. Ah! Should review the fighting in Minecraft. Well, that's simple. But yeah, I'm not that far away from Cornwall. Anyway, yeah, review the fighting in Minecraft. not particularly effective. I find it hilarious that you used to be able to parry with a sword, and now you can't, which sucks. I mean, one of the things, you know, you have things like axes. It's, I mean, per hit, and obviously durability counts in uses. So sometimes I feel like the axe is now superior to the sword, even though that's a tool and the sword is supposed to be designed for fighting, because each hit does less damage of a sword, and each hit does more damage of an axe. But it used to be useful because with a sword you can parry, which reduced damage from getting shot. Ha! I did not know you could parry explosions, but yeah, I know it was overall quite useful. And yeah, axes are slow, which is interesting because in real life they'd be quite fast. In fact, I'd say they'd fairly closely match up to the speed of a sword, because what happens is you just got something that's more forward weighted. But from the sorts of axes that I've seen, granted I've never had the chance to find proper original fighting axes, just reproductions. Oh, this is my home base. Yes, get in there, my son. I found my way home. But yeah, axes are quite fast. They're not, you know, they're not lightning fast, but they're similar to moderate weighted swords. They tend to be about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds and be weighted all the way towards the end. Yeah, I suppose they did a fairly decent job by, like you said, sort of nerfing the... let's cut that up. Yeah, like you said, sort of slow recovery, so that it charges up that powerful hit slower. Yeah, I heard they get a bonus against shields, just on top. Wait a second, I haven't slept in a while, have I? I'm going inside. Okay. But, basically what I find useful about axes is that, in terms of fighting, is that they hook. So when you fight with an axe, you've got the strong possibility of... Ooh, doing quite well for Iron. You've got the strong possibility of, you know, finding an opponent's weapon and then guiding it. I mean, people mention about hooking shields. I'm not so big a fan of hooking shields, because the problem is, I mentioned this in my video debunking Assassin's Real Braveheart, which was some documentary about stuff based on Braveheart, really. But the problem I had with it was, if you hook your axe on a shield, your opponent knows where the axe is. So at that point they go, you know, if I felt an axe hook onto my shield, I'd just immediately attack the opponent. I would almost disregard my safety. I'd just, you know, I wouldn't really be minding too much about getting hit with a shield, unless it's one that's got an actual sharp spike on it, or if the opponent has a second weapon, like say a dagger, that's going to cause a real threat. But if it's just an axe, or, you know, an axe with a fairly harmless shield, I don't give a damn. You know, you've got your axe hooked on my shield, and then it's no longer a threat to me because it's staying there on the shield. Take a second or two to recover and start attacking again, which is more than enough time for me to swing or stab at least a couple of times if I've got a fairly nimble arming sword, which, as I said, I prefer to use anyway. Alright, yeah, you found it a disadvantage binding a sword. Yeah. if you don't know what to do, one of the things... Yeah, exactly. Grappling is a good idea. What I've found useful when it comes to... From my limited, very limited experience using axes, is when they grapple onto each other, they end up hooking on each other's, on each other's heads. And I find if you make a sudden move, not that you just pull, you make a very sudden move and put your full body weight into yanking it, so your opponents are put off balance, and you either do it with a backward step or a forward step, bringing your back foot in front of you. Basically, you should be able to have your opponent go in much closer, and they should have less time to react to the fact that you've suddenly closed distance, hopefully. And then at that point, in an ideal world, you'd be able to, disarm them. Or even grapple their arm, not necessarily do anything, just hold it while you untangle your axe, stop them from hitting you, and then whack them. I've seen that work. It's a similar concept actually with sickles. Except sickles, being a bit curved in their hooks, tend to come free a bit more often. Whereas of course axe beards completely hook on and fairly much stay there. Yeah, that actually, I don't know if you've ever seen this really old video of mine, which was the Swords and Cider compilation. My earliest one. It was from around 2010 or something. Back when I was first starting HEMA. But it showed that actually, because it was allowed in our rules, yeah, we actually saw some people throw swords at each other. It was actually already at that point where... if you could, per opponent that you fight in the random weapons tourney, you're allowed to throw your weapon at the opponent once. If it hit the opponent, you got a score. If it didn't, you missed or you got deflected, that's it, tough. And you probably will be disarmed and lose. That happened to me. I was unlucky enough to have a person who was quite good at deflecting such things. Also didn't help, I think he had a buckler or something. So it was quite fun at the time. But, I mean, I'm not a great fan of axes. Biggest problem is the fact that they are... It's mostly just how they're not quite so forgiving. I find with a sword, if you ended up a bit too close, and let's say you were cutting at the neck, you didn't put enough force into the cut, that's fine, you can do a draw cut, so you're still covered when you're using a sword. Or let's say you cut too close with something like an axe, you do nothing except hurt someone with a handle. With a sword, you can, being close to the handle, you can still either put some force into that cut and make that impact and actually, a martially viable, decent hit. Or even... Let's try some of this. Let's try again. Or alternatively... Okay. Where was I? Oh yes. You can, actually hit someone hard enough, or you can do a draw cut. So basically slicing along. Those sorts of things would just not be able, would not be possible with an axe. So and of course you've got things like pommel strikes. It just seems like you have so many more options when you're using a sword compared to when you use an axe. Because of an axe, you must hit with force, because you can't really do a draw cut with an axe. You must hit with the end, you know, the very head of the axe. If you don't, you know, you're just basically smacking someone with a handle that doesn't do much. I mean, with a sword, you can even hold it upside down and do a, you know, a murder stroke. You can smash them with the pommel. It's quite good. I like that. Whereas you'd never be able to do that with, you know, another item, such as, well, an axe or warhammer, things like that. You do get some items which come with butt spikes, but that's on the modern reproductions. I'm not aware of any originals that had butt spikes or things like that. Spears did, yes, and other pole arms, but I'm not sure about. No. Fun event. Oh, hello, Roucher. Oh, I didn't realise it changed to a different person. Fun event. Instructor. Yeah. What is the hunt? Okay. So we'll just mix synthetic weapons. Everyone goes to different sections, different times, and then hunt each other. What is it, like a battle royale? Okay. Once you kill someone, they join your team. Once everyone's on the same team, the game is over. And the one guy who survived the whole time wins. Ah. Oh yes, it's a bit like that whole Bulldog game that we used to have over here in Britain, where it's like tag, but with the rules that you mentioned. Wait a second, is this the Fool's Gold? I need to read the signs. But yeah, it'd be cool to have that with... Fool's Gold, wrong place. Hollow Pit, Abandoned Mineshaft, here we go. But yeah, that sounds really good. Now you mentioned they go with mixed weapons. The next question would be whether you're using random weapon tickets, so you know people are designated weapons not of their choosing, or whether they get to choose their own weapon sets. Because it could well fall into the trap where if they're able to pick their own weapons, people would just choose things like longsword, since they're hoping, you know, people are hopefully optimistic enough to think, oh, you know, I'm going to be the last man standing, and at that point they just choose something like a longsword because it's really good. You know, it's really good for being an individual fighting against opponents. And of course, if there was an option to go for something even heftier, like your Montante, Zweihander, those sorts of, you know, hefty ones, I mean, that's just the immediate first choice. I'd say, you know, if they said, oh, you can choose these things, and I go, alright, is that Montante? Yeah, you can use that. Well, I am. I really am. Because, you know, at that point, what you're doing is... Let's rearrange this. Here we are. What you're doing is you're getting a sword that can stave off several opponents at once. Yeah, so there we go. You have a synthetic Montante. So you can imagine the last person standing would be the... Hello, Bethany Chanel. So it would end up being, you know, the last person standing because you're the lucky sod who was allowed the Montante. Just because you can stave off multiple opponents so easily with that thing. It's quite literally what it's designed for. It's a field sword. Whoa. We're not going there. There we go. But, another thing to bear in mind would be things like spears. If you're asking me or Laura, I'll assume you're asking me just in case. My day's been alright. I'm off work today because I've got, well, I had 2 days of holiday and I just used these spare ones. Okay, I've been in the process of building some heater shields, at least one before the event. Fair enough. So a heater shield would be a good advantage. Well, yeah. Yes, Ryan, it would be a good advantage. I mean, think about it. A heater shield would allow you to, you know, stave off blows and cover an angle so much more effectively than a sword or, you know, a buckler or something else smaller. I mean, if you had something as large as a Norman kite shield or a Roman scutum, although it would be a little bit awkward in the handling, you could basically sit around and, you know, cover a whole side of your body whilst keeping all of your opponents at bay pretty much, as long as you don't let them surround you from all angles. But that's just tactics. As long as you don't get flanked, you're fine. So yeah, having a heater shield, I mean, it'll probably get to the point where the other guys will say, "Hey, Ryan, you're cheating." At which point you will remind them, "Oh, but it's historical, right? It's historically accurate." Although, you know, at that point you could say, well, getting shot with a crossbow is historically accurate. Not recommended, by the way. Don't get shot with a crossbow. I mean, my helmet didn't do very well against the crossbow I had. Yeah, slinging some tennis balls, that'd be interesting, but I'll tell you one thing, Ryan, it's really difficult to get the accuracy right. I mean, I've been able to get the power and distance, but you need the right length of string, other things like that. It does get very difficult, actually. What? Oh, right, yeah. Tape a longsword, you've got a partisan. It'd be quite heavy. How strong are you, Ryan? I mean, if I remember rightly, you're a similar-ish height and build to me. Oh, wow, it's 10:30. I did not realise. Anyway, no wonder my eyes are getting heavy. If you're using steels, please don't do that. But, certainly a spear is recommended, I think. Partisan, maybe not so much, because... Oh, right, yeah, synthetic. Good, good. But, in terms of creative ways to go about the event, let me think. Be a good way to defeat people. Like I said, Montante is a very strongly recommended tactic because you can just stave off lots of opponents. It actually kind of depends on what you expect to happen. If you expect to die early on, you actually should expect to be part of a group, in which case Sword and Shield is really good. Yeah, I was gonna say, Raucha, if you've got other people to back you up, maybe, but if you're on your own, throwing your sword will disarm you, even if you're just up against one person. It's such a risky tactic, even if you assume, you know, there's nobody else in the vicinity. You throw your sword, you lose it. Oopsie. You don't have a weapon. But in terms of fighting as a group, yeah, maybe. Personally, I think even as a group, it's better not to do that. If I was fighting as part of a group, I would... Well, if I was expecting to fight as part of a group, maybe I'm the first... Let's assume I'm the first man or something. Then I think what I'd most prefer to do is just go for Sword and Shield. Something like a heater shield like you described you were making. Really good. Oops. So once you got that sort of thing going, you know, you can ward off attacks coming from all sorts of directions. Providing a lot of danger to your opponent, whilst keeping fairly safe yourself. And being able to provide defense. I guess you get allowed in a battle so you can push them off the feet. Okay, Viking shields are allowed. Alright. Yeah. There's that. I mean, to be honest, I prefer the sort of, you know, Occam's razor. You know, the answer with the fewest assumptions is usually the best. In this particular case, I'd say standard flanking, because if you try to outflank someone and you're not doing quite so well, the worst that happens is you haven't managed to outflank them, and you know, you haven't managed to outflank them, and then I've lost my train of thought. Oh yes, flanking. Yeah. Either it fails, in which case it's just standard fighting, and you haven't really lost any advantage, or it works, and then your opponent gets wrecked. I like wrecking opponents. Yeah. One thing you'd need to think about in terms of rules, Ryan, is you need to ask, what are the opponent's side going to do? You know, do they have maybe a reset time? Or maybe a particular safe point? Heck, I mean, if you have a judge or someone who's making sure everyone's obeying the rules, you know, someone who's, or somebody else who's not participating in the fight themselves, you could have them as a sort of safe zone, so to speak. So then, if someone is struck, you know, let's say someone's struck, and they're on the team that's already lost, you know, the hunting team, and what they do is, you know, they have to stay back and reset for a bit. And also there should be, you'd have to wonder, excuse me, do the people on the, you know, the side who haven't been hit at all yet, do they have a chance to team up with each other? Because otherwise, you know, what you could do is, let's say you have one hunter and loads of the hunted. They could just gang up on the person and beat them up. That's not Retiarius, that's Hunter. Oh, wait, I see. So there's no one particular hunted or hunter team. You've just got loads of different teams, and eventually one team just becomes too much. That's interesting, actually. I like that. But yeah, to avoid the confusion of, I've been tagged, I've been tagged, I've been tagged, I've been tagged. You might want to have some sort of reset time. So someone's hit, they have, you know, they go to, I don't know, maybe not the safe zone, they go, if there's none available, maybe they go outside, and then they have, let's say, 4 seconds, 2 seconds, whatever. They hold up their weapons, they say, nope, I've been hit. They change their teams, and then done. I was wondering if you could have ribbons, but if you've got huge teams, you know, you could have all sorts going on. You know what would be useful instead of having ribbons? if you had a particular war cry, that would be really funny. So if there's a fight going on, you know, let's say I've got a team and I'm over with you lot in the States, I'd probably have huzzah or something else fairly British. And then when people are on my team, and there are loads of people in different outfits, different weapons, and I think, who's on whose team? All the people who've joined me shout, huzzah! And, you know, somebody else who's on somebody else's team might shout, I don't know, something boring. Something not very British. Yeah, you know, maybe they could... I remember this one person from my Iron Door collective whose battle cry was quinoa, which is some sort of food. I think it's made with some sort of grains or something. Like terrible porridge, I'll call it. Yes, quinoa is terrible porridge. There we go. But yeah, that was his battle cry. But you know, you could have one team yelling quinoa, so you go, ah, yeah, he's on that team. And then my lot will be shouting, huzzah! It's Jonathan's team, and so on and so forth. No, he's not Greek. He is British, like myself. Yeah. Metatron's battle cry, yeah, exactly. So if you had Ralph, is it Ralph? No, Raph, not Ralph. Raffaello, Barney, and he'd be shouting pasta, and there'd be me yelling huzzah, and there'd be, I don't know. Since you guys are in the States, I don't know, what would be crying? You'd probably be crying guns or make America great again or some other such stuff. Oh, yes. For King and context, yes. I like it. But yeah. So, like I said, I mean, I was... On a serious note, though, I was initially thinking ribbons, but the problem is, you know, who would be chasing them around and making sure everybody's got the ribbons for the teams, making sure we've got enough, and what if there are about 4 or 5 teams in the end, you know, if just a couple of people each, you'd need a lot of coloured ribbons, you need to make sure they're up to, you know, up to however many people, -1, you know, let's say there are 15 people, you need 14 of each colour, it's just a nightmare. So what you could do instead, like I said, you just have, let's put these away. Like I said, you could just have it much simpler than that. And have people with a battle cry. And, you know, they don't have to battle cry all the time and announce their presence. If they're sneaking around, then, you know, they shut up. You know, they agree, they all know and agree who's on what team, and that's all fine. They just need to use their battle cry for when they're actively in combat. So, you know, 2 teams, or, you know, a team and a lone wolf find each other. They need to know who's on what team, you know, who's the person we're killing, whatever. So they've got their battle cries. And that's when it gets done. Yeah, cheap Surcoat cars. I go back to the original thing I mentioned about the ribbons, though. Because if you had loads of Surcoats or ribbons, who is going to be running around an entire forest making sure everybody's got, you know, the colour coats that they need? Battlefield tactics. There are a few. You can have a proper line, so equivalent to a... yeah, you could fake a battle cry and kill a foe. I think I'd have it so that you have... I'd have a strict rule where you can only battle cry your own distinct battle cry. You know, you're only the one for your team. You're not allowed to do it for other opponents. So if you want to sneak around and kill someone, you, you know, don't mention your presence and just hit them instead. Like a proper sneaky person. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, circuits would be nicer looking, but you'd have exactly the same problem again. What's this? So yeah, battle cry, strict rule for, you know, you can't replicate other people's battle cries, that sort of thing. What else? Oh, so in terms of battle tactics, going back to that, yes, you can have a proper shield wall, a line. So, you know, when you've got your line, basically you've got people's weapons and shields covering each other. Having shields and having things like pole arms, long swords and other longer weapons, either sort of diagonally, you know, just behind. Duck call, that would be interesting. Besides that, you can also have what's called a Forlorn Hope as part of a Boar's Tooth, not to be confused with a Fiore stance. Boar's Tooth in tactics is referring to having a triangular formation. And when you have that, you know, that sort of triangular formation, you can break through enemy lines. It's basically a more direct approach. A bit like flanking, except rather than going around to the sides, you've got someone who is very experienced to go straight through the middle. Or even someone who's part of the what's called Forlorn Hope. So in other words, someone you're expecting to sacrifice. And then you sacrifice them, but in the process you break through and outmaneuver several opponents. Dangerous tactic with smaller numbers, but when you've got larger numbers, that's good. Besides that, you should agree on pinning. We should have, if you've got a team going up, you should have distinct pinning and outmaneuvering forces. So if you have someone who is stronger, if you have people who are a bit like me, who are quite defensive and protective, you know, prefer to keep their distance, prefer to ward off attacks and counter rather than take the offensive approach and do the risky maneuvers, or just someone who, again, like me, who isn't particularly fast at running around and is more overt, you can have them be the centre of the attention and have them hold the line and ward off opponents' strikes, deliver strikes back of their own, and just generally make a nuisance of the opponents. In the meantime, you have lighter people. You have people who are more manoeuvrable, people who are more aggressive, and people who, you know, prefer that particular kind of approach. And at that point, you know, you have the flanking, you know, the flanking fighters go over and attack the HEMA rated ghillie suit. That would be interesting. I'll tell you what, it is nearly 11 in the evening, so I shall leave it at that. I am around tomorrow though, because I'm off work. So if you want another live stream, excuse me, comment it on my Discord, or in the comments, or on my main channel page, just anywhere I can see it really, and I'll do another. But for now, ta-ra! See you guys later, and thanks for the chat. Bye-bye.